So, with 11th edition on the horizon, I figured let's finally make that how to play Warhammer guide. But since this is an idiot's guide, let's make this as simple as possible and easy to follow. So we'll only focus on primaries and kill. So, I guess let's talk about it. Hello everyone, it's me the Warhammer complaining guy, Revan/Handy, destroyer of wallets and maker of terrible financial decisions. Back with another video talking about Warhammer. And because this is probably going to be my longest video to date, please don't die in the algorithm day one. Also, I just wanted to quickly thank everyone for supporting the channel, and if you found this video helpful by the end of it, I would appreciate it if you liked the video and subscribed, and you can also ask any follow-up questions when I'm streaming on YouTube and Twitch. Plus, maybe use my affiliate link and code from Starforge for some really cool Warhammer merch. And if you like what I'm doing and want to be a Giga Chad, maybe become a channel member too. Anyways, showtime. But before I even talk about the phases of the game and data sheets, we need to set some ground rules first. Like I stated earlier, this is me teaching you how to play a game of Warhammer, so we're going to treat this as a bare bones game of 40k. So let's ignore secondary objectives for now, and again, most of what this is going to boil down to is kill. Even though there are primary objectives, if you want, you can just ignore primary objectives 2 altogether and just make it a deathmatch to keep it as simple as possible. So any weird interactions I'm not even going to mention. The deployment zone layout is going to be hammer and anvil, or whatever the hell this one is that has these type of deployment zones. Terrain layout is all up to you. And if you do use this guide while playing your first game of Warhammer, I want you to either play a 500 or 1000 point game instead of the standard 2000 points, since we don't want to burn out your already short attention span. So first, I'm assuming you already have an army, or you already have an idea of what army you want. If you answer no to either, I recommend checking out my video on how to start your very first 40k army. Secondly, you need to decide what detachments you're going to be using for your army. You can either use one of your primary detachments, or since you have 3 detachment points, or DP for short, a mix of 2 minor detachments of your choice. And the units you choose and their associated data sheets will determine the playstyle of your army, which I'm of course going to talk about right now.
The numbers, basically. What do they mean?
So what the f do all these numbers and letters mean? Well, let me explain. So the M is how far your model can move in inches, T is the model's toughness, which will come into play in subsequent phases, SV is your saving throw, W is the number of wounds per model in a unit, LD is leadership, which I'll mention much later, and OC is objective control, which determines who controls the objective. Now, if you see something that says invulnerable save, that pretty much means that this is your oh shit, I might be bonus special saving throw that a few units have. Because if you fail your initial save, which I'll get into more detail in the shooting phase, you're probably dead. Then for ranged and melee weapons, range is pretty straightforward. A is the number of attacks per model, WS is your weapon skill, and BS is not bullshit, but your ballistic skill. And a 3+ on either just means you have to hit on a 3 or up. S is the strength of that weapon, AP is the armor penetration, and D is the damage. Your weapons might also have words next to their names and brackets, and I'll mention more about that when I talk about the shooting and fight phase. Then you have abilities right here, so this is where infiltrate and scout would be, or any other unique abilities to that unit. Other pertinent things on the datasheet include how many models per unit and what weapons they can use, and also keywords that I'll be ignoring until later on. HQs will also have on their datasheet a list of units they can attach to, and vehicles that transport units will have the number of models they can transport and any restrictions. But now you hopefully understand how to read a datasheet. Now, stratagems are like extra abilities related to the theme of your chosen detachment, but now they cost a command point and you gain one every turn, or some units have special abilities that can generate command points. But also pay attention to when stratagems can be used and their requirements, because some stratagems only work on certain units and in certain phases. But now that all the basic mumbo jumbo is out of the way, let's talk about the wombo jumbo. So the way a battle round plays out is 5, technically 6 main phases if we include the end phase, or Rip Psychic phase, with the phase order being command phase, movement phase, shooting or shoosting phase, charge phase, and finally the fight phase. And before all that happens, we of course need to set up where our minis are starting on the board, also known as the deployment phase. So the way deployment works is you and your opponent roll a dice, and whomever rolls the highest deploys first. But you first mention any units that are in strategic reserves, and this can't be more than 50% of your army points wise. And then you alternate deploying one unit at a time until you each have no units left. If you have units with the infiltrate keyword, you can set them up anywhere that's 9 inches away from the enemy's deployment zone and any enemy model during this time. And if you have any units that can redeploy, you also do that too. Now, time for another dice roll to see who goes first with the highest going first. Also, don't forget to shake your opponent's hand, it's good Warhammer etiquette. Okay, so before the round starts, you also want to see if any units in your army has the Scout X ability. If they do, you can move them a specified number of inches before the first battle round starts, and it's important to note that you can only use this ability nowadays if the unit is within your deployment zone. Then once you've finished deploying and done all your scouting moves, that's when the game can really start with the first phase, the command phase.
I command you, make me a Krabby Patty!
So the command phase is pretty straightforward. You each get one command point and then you can use any abilities that can be used in the command phase. So not much really happens in the command phase of the first battle round. Nothing really starts happening till battle round 2's command phase, which of course I'll be talking about much later. Now it's time for the movement phase. In the movement phase, you of course move your models. This is what the M on your datasheet represents. You can also choose to advance during the movement phase, and to do this, you roll a d6 and then add that to your movement profile. But you can't shoot in the shooting phase if you advanced unless you have an ability that lets you advance and shoot or stratagems. Then in future turns, you're going to have units stuck within engagement range, which means you can use a fallback move to disengage from an enemy up to your movement profile, but generally what you want to do is get as close as possible or get on primary objectives to hopefully hold on to them until your next turn, and this is what objective control or OC is for. Count the number of models on an objective terrain piece, and then tally up their OC per model. And of course, try to have more objective control than your opponent to gain or keep control of said objective. But the movement phase is what essentially sets up the rest of the turn by creating sightlines for shooting, and possibly charges if you can make it there in the first round. You also want to keep in mind unit placement on the first turn, because in 11th, your units don't get alpha striked in the shooting phase anymore, unless they're within 18 inches or they haven't been activated yet for shooting. That means no more of the days of that Calidus grab tank one-shotting your big tanker monster from 48 inches away on turn 1.
Damn it, damn it, damn it, damn it!
Also, you can't end your movement phase within 2 inches of an enemy model, which is considered engagement range. But that's the movement phase, time for the shooting phase. But before I talk about the America phase, it's sponsor time. From the sponsor of today's video, Tabletop Stronghold. So I hope you successfully got your Armageddon box pre-orders in, which means you might need another carrying case, or you just need a carrying case for your first army. So why don't you get yourself a Mag Case 2.0? Because no matter how deep you are into the Warhammer hole, you should probably consider getting a sturdy carrying case like the Mag Case, because Warhammer ain't getting any cheaper. But the Mag Case makes transporting your army simple and easy using the power of magnets and adjustable magnetic trays created by the
all-powerful Magnet Wizard.
And the Mag Case comes in a variety of sizes to transport just about any army you can think of besides a full-size Titan Maniple, and I can guarantee you'll find that perfect Mag Case that suits your needs, like the Mag Case Mini for me. But if you want to help me help you, use my link in the pinned comment or description to get 35% off your next purchase for the big Independence Day sale. America, baby! So thank you Tabletop Stronghold for sponsoring this video. If you want to get any Mag Case that ships to pretty much anywhere in the world for free, go to tabletopstronghold.com. So at the start of the pew pew phase, this is where you pop any stratagems or abilities that can help improve your
Alakablam!
profiles. This is also where determining if you advance and shoot comes into play. So some weapons have the assault keyword, which means you can advance and shoot those weapons, so keep that in mind. Now it's time to also mention some weapon keywords, and of course assault being one of them. Then you have rapid fire, close quarters, indirect, precision, sustained hits, twin linked, and many more. These are just additional quote-unquote abilities for your weapons. For example, rapid fire with a number next to it is the number of additional shots you get if you're within half range of your guns. So rapid fire 4 means I'll get 4 additional shots within half range. Sustained hits 2 means you'll get 2 extra hits if you roll a critical success. This just means you rolled a 6. And twin linked means you get to reroll any failed wound rolls. There are also more that I'll mention in a few minutes or so that can affect if a model lives or not. Okay. So now that that's out of the way, when you shoot at a target, you take the number of attacks and multiply it by the number of models in a unit. That's how many hit rolls you have to make. So a unit of 5 shoots its weapons with 5 attacks each, which means you need to roll 25 dice, and all those need to be equal to or greater than your ballistic skill. But before you even roll those 25 dice, you also need to take into account any abilities, stratagems, or just your opponent being in cover that will modify your ballistic skill to make it easier or harder to land hits. The easiest thing to understand is cover. So if a model is in cover like this, they're a -1 to hit, which means you now hit on a 4 instead of a 3. Then you take however many successful hits you got, and it's time to calculate how many of those hits wound. Also, if the weapon has lethal hits, That just means any critical success of a 6 will automatically wound the target, so put those dice that rolled 6s to the side since they count as successful wounds. Let's say out of the 25 shots, you successfully hit 14 times, and 3 of those were lethals, which means you're rolling 11 wound rolls now. Your weapon's strength now needs to overcome your opponent's toughness, so if your weapons are strength 5 and your opponent is toughness 4, you wound them on a 3. If they're toughness 5, a 4, and if they're T6, a 5. If their toughness is 2 times greater than your strength, you then have to roll a 6, or if it's 2 times less, a 2 for a successful wound roll. Then this is where armor penetration comes into play. If your weapon has, say, AP -2, you or your opponent has to take their saving throw with a -2 to the roll. So instead of saving on a 3, it now saves on a 5. But let's say this model has an invuln save of a 4. Instead of needing to save on a 5, now it's a save on a 4. And on a successful save, there's no need for damage calculation. But let's say you succeeded in wounding your opponent. Well, damage is pretty straightforward. It's just the number under the damage unless it has either a D3 plus X or D6 plus X. This just means roll the appropriate dice and add the additional damage. But what if the weapon also has devastating in its keyword, or it's an ability? Well, on a critical success wound roll of a 6, that model now takes X number of devastating wounds equal to the weapon's damage, and these can't be saved in any way unless you have a feel no pain, which is your backup save, so to say. So a feel no pain means you need to save on the number it says to, with each point of damage being 1 dice. So for example, the unit took 4 devastating wounds and it has a 4-up feel no pain. That means you need to roll a 4-up 4 times to mitigate the damage, and that feel no pain works on normal damage too. Once all the saves are made when applying the damage they got through, each successful roll is an instance of damage and is applied to one individual model in that unit at a time until that model gets oofed in Minecraft. As an example of my 11 wound rolls, 6 got through, including the 3 lethal hits, so 9 successful wounds, and my damage is 2 per successful wound. And the enemy's unit has 5 models with 3 wounds each, 2 dice equals 1 dead model, and the damage doesn't spill over, but for the sake of simplicity, let's say there's no devastating wounds in this instance. And let's just say for this example, they failed all their saving throws. That means of the 9 dice, I unalive 4 models with the final model having 1 wound left. But you're going to repeat this process for every unit in your army that can shoot, and once you're done, it's time for the charge phase. So for the corn phase, I mean the charge phase and subsequent fight phase, with 11th edition, charging is a lot less stressful now to an extent, because you can now charge any unit as long as it's within range of a 2d6 dice roll, as opposed to previous editions where you selected one unit to charge, and if you failed, well, you're out of luck. So now the way it works is you roll 2d6, and whatever result you get for that dice roll is your charge range. It's also important to remember that your army might have stratagems or abilities that allow them to either gain a +1 on your charge or reroll charge rolls, but it has to already be within 12 inches. You can't get more than a 13-inch charge or less than 2 inches. I know we want a little extra length, but sadly that can't happen. Just know that the dice god is a cruel mistress. Then once you've made your roll and you have your charge distance value, make sure you're within engagement range, and you need to end your charge movement as close as possible in base-to-base contact, because this matters in the fight phase, also known as kiss that unit you spent hours painting's ass goodbye, because no matter how much you don't want it to happen, it will happen. But again, that's if you or your opponent can even get up the board fast enough turn 1.
Blood for the blood god!
Now it's time for the final phase, the blood for the blood god phase, where it's either absolute carnage or you're hitting yourselves with wet noodles. Now some melee weapons also have sweep and cleave profiles, which just means it's another way to attack your enemies, and you can only use one in a fight phase, so choose wisely. It's also important to keep in mind any abilities that may affect your hit rolls, wound rolls, AP, or damage in this phase, because there can be a lot on top of the abilities your weapons may have, and it's a lot to keep track of. But the charges have been made, and so the fight phase begins. This is where we now pile in to get as many attacks as possible, because if some of your models are not within 2 inches of base-to-base contact with the enemy, and another one of your models, that unit can't fight and you actually lose attacks. So you want to get as many minis as possible in the fight with your 3-inch pile in move, and then it's time to fight. So in 11th edition, models that charged will always have the fight's first keyword, even if your opponent's models you're charging has it too. So the charging player will always resolve their fights first, and then it gets passed on to your opponent to swing back. But because this is already a long video, my shooting phase example of how shooting works and the types of saves can be used as a reference to how hits and damage calculation are done in the fight phase, because it's the exact same thing but now with melee, and I'm not going to repeat myself. Again, just keep in mind what units are in range to fight, because you can lose attacks if they're not close enough to what you're fighting. There's also a new fight phase mechanic called overrun fights, using this example of how it works, and knowing most 40k players, we're gonna find a way to abuse it somehow. And depending on whose turn it is for the fight phase, you're going to lose units, which means you will have less attacks, but that's how the fight phase plays out. This is why usually melee weapons have higher AP and are more effective against infantry, although there are some melee weapons that excel in anti-tank, but that's the basic structure of a turn in 40k. Now let me do a brief rundown of how the following turns will play out and any relevant rules that come with it. So if you lost any models in a unit and that unit survived being turned into pink mist in the shooting phase or turned into paste in the fight phase, it has to now take a battle shock test in the following command phase. So a battle shock test will determine what objectives you control in the following command phase, which is why you better pray to the God Emperor or whatever god your army worships that you pass, because this can make or break how the rest of the game plays out. So to determine if you need to take a battle shock test, units that are below half strength, which means half of the models in that unit are gone, or if it's a large model, half its wounds are gone. If this applies to any units in your army, that means you need to take a battle shock test, because on turn 2, that's when control for objectives starts. To take a battle shock test, that surviving unit needs to roll a 2d6, and the result has to be greater than its leadership. If it succeeds, it's fine. If not, it fails, and now takes away its objective control, and you no longer control that objective, and it can't be the target of stratagems until the next command phase when you take another battle shock test. That is, if it could even survive to the next turn. I think it's also important to mention that some armies do have stratagems that allow you to auto-pass a battle shock test. Then in the movement phase of turn 2, you can ingress your reserves and put them down on the table within the restrictions set in the core rules. Then the shooting phase and charge phase will always play out like earlier, but now if there's ongoing fights from the last fight phase, once all the new charges and fights are resolved, ongoing fights alternate between players, and now if an ongoing unit on either side has fights first, and the unit it's in ongoing combat with doesn't, fights first will always fights first. And then you repeat this process for 3 more turns, and the winner is decided by who has the most primary objective points. And if you're playing with secondaries, that gets added to the total 2 to make it out of 100 points. But yeah, that's an idiot's guide to playing Warhammer. If you have any more questions about Warhammer, feel free to stop by when I'm streaming on YouTube or Twitch, since I stream to both, or you can join my Discord, but read the damn rules. But I hope this guide helped you learn how to play Warhammer, and I do also have more guides on my channel if you're interested, like beginner guides and magnetization guides for some armies. But I think I've talked enough for now because my voice is kind of dying if I'm gonna be honest. So anyways, thanks for watching the video. If you want to support the channel, I would greatly appreciate it if you like the video, subscribe, maybe become a channel member too, along with hitting the bell for upload notifications. But I'll see you on the next video, and remember, when you play Warhammer, being poor is a choice.